Hey there, folks. This is Misadventurer here today with the 20th developer diary from my Imperator Rome overhaul mod project, Hegemony. This is the second part of a trilogy of developer diaries going over the upcoming alpha patch 0.7. Previously, I talked about the new authority and cult influence mechanics coming in 0.7, as well as the diplomacy-oriented religious developments tech tree that supports them. In this dev diary, I'm going to be continuing my coverage and overview of 0.7, talking about the new character overhaul, as well as the cultural developments tech tree, which is full of character modifiers that support the overhaul. Also talk at length about the way the new character system directly impacts political gameplay, and I'll be focusing in this video on how that works in polyarchies, which is my mod's name for the collective government form of democracies and oligarchies, which share most of their mechanics. With that noted, let's go ahead and get started. There's a lot to cover. Now, one more thing to note as well as we start things up here is I've been adding in some more Thucydides quotes. You may notice some new ones in the load screen. I have a lot more coming, but I don't want to slow down this already extremely large alpha patch with just tons of quotes, so I will be adding those in over the course of multiple patches in the future as just kind of a background thing, just to further diversify the different load screen quotes. Another change that you may notice if you're particularly eagle-eyed, or should I say owl-eyed, is the new Athenai flag. Now let me take a second to talk about this new flag design. This design is pretty different from the vanilla Imperator Rome Athens flag and from the previous vanilla style flag that I've been using in the mod. But I think this is actually my favorite iteration of the flag and the one that I plan to stick with, assuming that I'm not the only person that likes it and all of you don't tell me in the comments that this looks terrible. So please let me know your feedback, especially if it's negative feedback. I want to know if people are not on board with this new design approach for the Athenai flag and possibly for the other flags as well. Now what I've done here is I've closely modeled this design off of the Athenai coin. Their coins are actually one of the only sort of primary sources we have about the iconography of their city-state, as is the case for a lot of classical Hellenic city-states, and I've very, very closely designed this flag to resemble the layout and structure of the coin and have the same symbology. Now, the owl design in the files that I'm using from Imperator Rome, this is a vanilla asset that I'm repurposing, is actually was actually seemingly created with this coin design in mind because it is extremely close to the coin design, although oddly it's not used in the base game, so I'm not entirely sure how that happened. But in terms of the other elements of the flag design, we've got the olive leaves that were in my previous design, although they've been sort of reorganized or kind of repositioned to be more accurate, and I've included some letters. Now, these letters taken together form a sort of shorthand that means of the Athenians. And this is on the coin to show that this is a coin issued by the city-state of Athenai, if somehow you didn't know what the owl symbol with the olive leaves meant in classical Hellas, which I don't know who you were if that didn't mean anything to you. But it was kind of a flex of, hey, like this is a coin that we're issuing because it was a silver coin, it was a valuable coin, and it was actually not just a symbol of Athenai, but a literal symbol of their power and their prosperity, because they were issuing these valuable coins all over the Hellenic world, and the spread of Athenian imperialism kind of happened alongside the spread of their coins. So money is often power in a figurative sense, but it's also power in a literal sense, with the very mercantile Athenians benefiting from the wide distribution of their valuable and distinctive coins. So anyways, this design, and again, if you look up a picture of a real-life Athenian coin, you'll see that it very closely emulated the layout of that coin design. This design is, on top of being more accurate, I think quite evocative of the kind of asymmetrical, kind of fragmented and sort of structurally messy aesthetic of classical Hellenic pottery art, which is another design motif I really like, and I was trying to replicate with these flags with the borders on the top and bottom. So it now sort of looks like you're almost looking at a hieroglyphic almost of a piece of pottery art that is displaying a symbol that represents Athenai modeled after the coin. But of course it's just the flag. So if there ever was to be a 100% accurate, no speculation allowed, flag recreation of an Athenian symbol, this is probably what it would look like based on what we have with the coin. But I know that this design is not the kind of standard paradox sleek flag designs that everyone typically is used to, and it may take a bit of time to get comfortable with it. Again, please let me know what you think about this design. I'm very open to feedback. If everyone thinks that this is just a really weird direction to take the flag design, let me know that. I want to know what the reaction is. But if other people think this is a cool design that kind of puts you in the classical Hellenic atmospheric mindset, which it does for me, then let me know that as well so I know that I'm going in the right direction. Now, having talked about the flags, let's talk about one other thing prior to getting into the character overhaul, which is the Autoconship. This is the office of the ruler in democracies and oligarchies. Now, in 0.7, Autocons will work basically the same in oligarchies as they did before, ruling basically for life until one of the other factions takes them out and there's a power struggle, that sort of thing that happens in oligarchies. But for democracies, things are going to be pretty different. Now, previously, I was operating under the assumption that in 431, Atenai was using a system where Autocons ruled for 10 years, and then there could be indefinite re-elections of the same person. This is actually not correct. I was misinterpreting the record on this, and that system has actually not been in use in Atenai for quite a while by the time my mod is set. Instead, by 431, Atenai was using a system sort of similar to the Roman consul system in terms of the rate of elections, with year-long Autoconships and no re-elections allowed for the same person. So every single year, a new man became the Autocon by an election, and could not again become the Autocon after that. Now, actually having year-long Autoconships in Hegemony would be quite the tall order, requiring quite a bit of rebalancing to accommodate that kind of gameplay mechanic, and who would even really want to have year-long election cycles? Well, apparently me, because I've done it. In 0.7, democracies will have year-long Autoconship reigns with elections every single January 1st, as accurate, at least in terms of the length of time, to classical Hellenic history, which of course is ultimately my goal with the mod, is to be very accurate, and if not accurate, at least authentic. And I'm also implementing that rule that a character cannot be re-elected at any point. Once they're elected one time, that's their one shot at being the Autocon. Once their year is up, they cannot be re-elected again. Now, if you are a savvy Imperator Rome player, as all of my subscribers are, you probably are already thinking about a specific issue with Imperator Rome and this kind of design philosophy. Aren't you going to run out of characters? This is a mod where, like in real history, only men are allowed to be Autocon under normal circumstances. You're going to run out of characters sooner or later. There's not that many to work with. I thought about that too, and I have made a few changes to the way families are balanced by the game when the campaign begins. See if you can notice what I've done. I've increased the number of characters in the families and in the minor character pool by a little bit. Now, this fourth thing down here, the politicians, this is the minor character pool. This is only appearing here because I'm in debug mode, which is why there's purple text on all of my tooltips. This will normally not appear for you if you're just playing without debug mode turned on, but these characters are all in the character list just at the bottom without the bolded names. These are all the minor characters. I mean, they're listed here under politicians collectively, as if they were a family, just for debug purposes. Now, the way that I've coded this is that every single playable country will have at least 25 minor characters when the game begins, and the game typically generates them all as male, and at least 10 male and 10 female characters per great family. All countries start with 3 great families, and actually, with Atenai, these 3 great families are the historically accurate 3 great families, or 3 of the great families from the period that I've added in here. The Pisistradid family, the Philidae family, and the Alcmaeonidae family as well. And you can actually get more than 10 characters in some cases. It's kind of random. But basically, the end result of all of this character generation changes is that you're not running out of characters at any point. It's possible if you really try hard to specifically kill all of your own characters. I don't know why you would do that. If you basically put your mind to it and make your entire campaign about specifically getting around my fix, it's possible you'd be able to destroy your own character pool enough to have shortages of available characters, but you'd basically have to commit yourself to doing that specifically in order to get around this fix. I think that this should hopefully prevent any sort of problems where you just don't have any characters to work with to accommodate the very quick election cycles of a new character, a completely new character, every single year becoming the Archon. Now, having noted that, one other thing to mention is the starting Archon for Atenai in 431. It was not actually Pedicles, and Pedicles will be in the mod. I've not added his character back in, but he will be in the historically accurate family for him, the Alcmaeonidae family. For now, the family head is set to, it will be set to him later, but for now the family head is set to the current starting ruler, Pythodorus, who was the historically accurate Archon for the time. We know basically nothing about this real-life historical person other than his name. He happened to be the Archon in 431 when the Peloponnesian War began, at least according to the Thucydides, and I think the Athenian Archon list also supports that, but that's all we know about him. Now, the way that this game works in a hard-coded sense, and I've been trying to fix this for a long time and I've not been able to find a workaround, is it automatically makes the leader of the, in the context of this mod, the democracies and the oligarchies, all parts of the stratocratic faction automatically, and I can't find a way to get around this. Just ignore the fact that Pythodorus is a stratocrat. In 1 year, he'll be elected out, or I should say he'll be voted out, and someone new will come in. And then the way that my system works will kind of kick into gear from there. I can't work around this hard-coded start situation because I'm using custom parties, and the game always defaults to the first party for the first ruler. And because of that, just ignore that Pythodorus, because his stats and traits are completely random, ignore whatever stats and traits he has, as they're not going to be reflective of him being in the stratocratic faction all of the time. And that's because the way that characters work is very closely tied to their relationship to political gameplay, including the party system. Let's talk about that now. Let me just hop into this guy here. Actually, let me find someone who's got a good set of modifiers for me to comment off of. Let's see. Let's see here. Here's a good one. Didas Alcmaeonidae. Alright, so let me first talk about the way that I've restructured the character sheet window here. I don't exactly know what to call it. The character menu, character window. So I've increased the size of the model of the character just because I think these models are actually pretty high quality, and I think it's nice to be able to see them in greater detail. Plus, this helps with creating thumbnails for YouTube videos about my mod, campaigns of my mod, which I encourage all of you to make, by the way. Any of you who make Hegemony content on YouTube, I will be happy to shout out or feature in some capacity on my own channel, and I will of course be making Hegemony content regularly, especially post 1.0. Now, the larger character models does have a few little glitches, as these models aren't really meant to be viewed this much, on top of there perhaps being some very minor graphical issues now and then when you look super closely. There's some odd proportions, especially with arms. You've got some very square body shapes. Maybe this is kind of a thin guy, but it's a bit more noticeable in some characters. Most of them look pretty good, and I've checked pretty thoroughly. One recurring problem, and I've also, by the way, changed the appearance of the sort of thumbnails of the characters that you see, like, when you're looking at their faces like this, where it is much easier to see that it's them. It's basically zoomed in on their upper body. Something that I've not been able to find a workaround for is what happens with the children, where on top of their thumbnail hilariously looking like them being just too short to be in the interface correctly, we've got a bit of a problem with the children not rendering fully. I don't know exactly what's causing this. It's very funny. Okay, the older one does correctly render. I think it's probably because this is actually a character that counts as an infant, even though it's modeling the appearance as like a child. Her sister, who's being modeled as the child model, is fully rendering, so that's good. But this like floating head situation is a little alarming. Probably best not to dwell on this. If I find a way to fix this without changing all of the work I've done on this new visual system, I'll implement it, but I think this is a pretty minor sacrifice. I mean, it literally is a minor sacrifice if you think about it. We've got a disemboweled kid over here. Yikes. All right, well, anyways, let's just move off of that imagery and find our guy again. Who did I click on before? Someone down here. Here he is. Right. So, anyways, let's talk about attributes. These are the 4 stats every character has: martial, finesse, charisma, and zeal. And let me first talk about the way that attributes affect the character's relationship to politics and how carefully I've thought through the big picture kind of macro scale way that you as a player will be playing as a democracy or an oligarchy, especially with the larger character pool. Something that the original Imperator Rome, the vanilla Imperator Rome experience, does a really impressive job of is implementing essentially a fairly complicated character system straight from, at that point, the most recent Crusader Kings game, Crusader Kings 2, without all of the bells and whistles and complexities added by that game's DLC and expansions, but honestly, quite an impressive addition, where if you were playing Imperator Rome because you had seen how its mechanics worked and you liked that it was basically a combination of Crusader Kings and Europa Universalis, the character system of IR did actually kind of help achieve that combination, as unbelievable as it may seem. My main problem with vanilla Imperator Rome is that most characters, despite their genuine complexity with multiple traits, their in republics in vanilla Imperator Rome, their party convictions being often quite hard to make sense of and seeming to be complicated, but really was just hard to make sense of. The problem was that there were so many characters that had all these different traits that you had to really spend time investigating and trying to puzzle out why they had different allegiances to different parties. You could figure it out if you read all the tooltips and took lots of time, but the main problem was that for all this complexity, there was just not really any need to invest your time into it, because ultimately, characters in vanilla Imperator Rome only mattered to the extent that they were loyal or disloyal, and to a smaller extent, whether they were a character you could use as an officer. Anyone who didn't have high enough stats to be a good officer, or had loyalty problems, you basically just put a band-aid over and forgot about. There was no need to attend to your cast of characters. Now in Hegemony 0.7 with the character overhaul, one of my main overarching design goals is both to make character management more reliable and more consistent, and also make it more important, as I want this to be an experience that feels easy to understand, but important to master, where your internal stability, your internal politics, really depends on you actually putting time into understanding who the characters of your polis are, what they're doing, and how you can guide them and manipulate them into doing what you would rather them be doing. Now, I'll talk more in the third dev diary of the trilogy about the new, as they're not yet finished, the new ways for you to engage in character manipulation to basically help shape the makeup of different factions and whatnot. But for now, what I'll say is that the main way that characters actually automatically get involved in politics in a democracy or an oligarchy is based directly and very unambiguously off of their attributes. Now, essentially, the character attributes contribute, among other things, directly to their conviction. Now, conviction is a polyarchy-specific mechanic, again, democracies and oligarchies, and I'll talk about the tribe and monarchy equivalent of this in the next video of the Dev Diary series. But in terms of conviction, the way that their attributes directly contribute to conviction is meant to be easy to understand, and it's consistent. Basically, every point of attribute contributes 0.01 to their conviction, which means that the 1 point of martial that Didas here has means he's getting 0.01 martial per month. No finesse means no plutocratic conviction. 2 charisma means 0.02 democratic conviction. And 7 zeal, his best stat, means that he is in the theocratic party as a supporter of the party because he has the highest theocratic conviction per month. So his theocratic party icon is golden. This system is meant to be easy to understand. You can look at a character for half a second, you look over here, which number's the biggest, that's their party. Most of the time, this should be a consistent way to immediately understand what a character is doing in your political system and leave no room for ambiguity. Now, there will be complexities to this I'll add in later and talk about more in the next video, but this core system is meant to be simple and predictable. One of the parts about playing as a republic in vanilla IR that I find the most frustrating is the very almost esoteric way the different traits and different stats guide characters into and out of different parties. It feels as though in those games you're playing from a point of view where characters are just in a party kind of in a way that you don't understand, or you can't understand without spending a ton of time like carefully reading their traits and thinking about how everything adds up. And character membership in parties just sort of feels like something that happens out of your control that you have to react to. In this system, I want the way characters join one of the 4 parties to feel immediately obvious and like something that you can very easily manipulate by changing their stats or adding or removing conviction directly. I'll talk about that more again in Dev Diary 21. Now, on top of attributes adding to a character's convictions with, again, 0.01 per point of attribute for each of the different parties, their attributes also add to something else, which is their popularity. So popularity is increased by 0.1 per month for each of the points of their attributes. This is a huge amount of popularity gain, and characters will gain popularity fairly briskly, especially when they have a lot of stats. So better, higher quality characters will gain popularity very quickly. Now there's going to be a number of ways to counteract this, and I will explain why you want to counteract this in a bit, as popularity and the new companion mechanic to popularity, which is called ambition, are both meant to be complex mechanics that have positive and negative implications, but are mostly mechanics you want to keep under control and keep on the low side for anyone who's not your current active ruler, which in a democracy with 1 year cycling rulers opens up a lot of very interesting playstyles where you actually need to think about, do I want to tank the popularity or ambition of a character who maybe is the incoming Archon, or maybe in a year or two will be the incoming Archon? Lots of things to consider. So popularity is increased directly every single month by the number of attribute points the character has. And it's also increased, in this case for this guy, by his office as the Theodoroi. That's one of my officers. I'm actually going to do a big rework of officers that I'll talk about in the next Dev Diary as well, so don't pay any attention to that specific name. It may change. But you get the idea. Popularity is mostly based on attributes, and having a position in the government also grants popularity. Now, let me go ahead and grant this guy 100 popularity just for demonstration purposes. What's this guy's ID 101? All right. He now has 100 popularity, and what does this mean? Well, let me go ahead and let 1 full month go by just to show you what happens with 100 popularity. It's going to be a little glitchy because I've not figured out how to fix all of the... In fact, I don't think I can fix it because there's some hard code stuff with the interface. But basically, his ambition is showing a 0, but he actually should have a below one point of ambition display. Let one more month go by so that it does display correctly. This is just kind of a glitchy interface thing. There it is, okay. So ambition is the companion mechanic to popularity. And ambition is the main reason popularity is a problem. So as ambition raises, and again, it's displaying a 0, and I don't think I can fix this particular graphical issue, but there's basically like a... Let's see here. Yeah, so 0.80 each month. So this character has 0.80 ambition at the moment. Now, as you can see, with 0.80 out of 100 possible ambition, this character has some pretty significant mechanics being added in. Now, ambition is going to increase the character's monthly wage by a lot, 500% monthly wage at 100 ambition, as well as increasing their Senate influence, which I'll talk about more in a moment, by a lot, plus 4% per 0.80, or really what I should say is 500% at 100, and also decrease their statesmanship decay. Now, statesmanship works basically the same as vanilla, where it's the rate at which a character retains their improved impact, or I should say, it's the amount that a character's impact is sort of calculated for their office, and it decays naturally, but increasing ambition reduces statesmanship decay, so a more ambitious character is better at being an officer, but they're also going to have a much higher wage, and they're going to have much more Senate influence. Now, what is Senate influence? And in fact, I should actually correct that. That should be localized as ecclesia, or excuse me, as personal influence. But let me just go ahead and talk about that now. Personal influence is the key reason for polyarchies, for democracies and oligarchies, why popularity and therefore ambition present a problem. Because personal influence, well, it's not... let me actually let another month go by to see if that does display correctly. Let's see. Actually, no, it's calculating on the mid-month for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. There it goes. Okay, now it's displaying correctly. I'll see if I can fix how that happens, but it does work, so that's good. So, personal influence is the main way that ambitious characters have a larger impact on politics. So basically, now that this character has a bit of ambition built up, we're seeing... In fact, it looks like personal influence is actually lagging a month behind, which I guess is fine. So it's actually using the previous month's ambition modifier, so don't worry about that. Either way, the point is that this is all happening in the background as you play, characters who are more popular, who are gaining lots of ambition, will have a amplified personal influence. Now, personal influence is using power base as its initial number, and this guy is gaining 5 power base from being in an officer position. And then this power base is being increased by his ambition amount. Now, I have 100 popularity because I've modded it in, or I've kind of cheated it in for this guy, so normally ambition would not raise this quickly. This is like a worst case scenario level of catastrophic ambition mismanagement. So this guy is gaining the most ambition you'll ever see anyone gain under normal circumstances, and that's why his these modifiers are raising so quickly. But the point is that in the background, all of your characters are gaining popularity from their stats, and their popularity is then increasing their ambition. They're becoming more politically savvy, they're becoming more ambitious, and their increasing ambition makes them more expensive to pay, increases their statesmanship decay reduction, or I should say reduces their statesmanship decay, makes them better officers, but it also makes them more impactful in terms of their personal influence. So their personal influence is their power base plus the percentage of their ambition. Now, what is personal influence doing? Well, time to switch over to talk about the Ecclesia. So here we are with the government screen, and to explain personal influence, I have to talk about it in the context of the parties and the factions. So we've got these 4 factions down here, and let me just start by talking about how personal influence plays into the system of factional influence. So factional influence is basically the percent of the Ecclesia, the assembly, that the faction controls, and it's changing monthly. And as it says here, factional influence is calculated by adding the combined personal influence of characters who support this faction, though this calculation is not exact. You can see these sort of rough numbers down here of the top influential supporters of the faction. Now keep in mind, this is characters who currently, in that monthly tick, support the faction, which means that it's the faction that they have as the outlined sort of shining icon of their different factions, the faction they have the most conviction for. So a character's personal influence is distinct from their faction, but whatever faction they support, they then give their personal influence to determine factional influence. Now, factional influence coexists alongside another mechanic called approval, or faction approval. Faction approval is meant to be something that doesn't change quite as reliably as influence. I sort of intend for it to be a kind of mercurial, slippery mechanic, mostly based on the factions reacting to your decision-making in terms of foreign affairs and how you handle different events. So all the factions will want you to do certain things, both in terms of political events or just non-political events that they have a reaction to, and faction approval will basically bounce around all over the place as you play, and it's going to be balanced to be basically very difficult to lock down permanently. As one of my problems with the balancing of vanilla Imperator Rome is that republics have extremely easy factions to kind of get high approval for and just keep as high approval, so nothing to worry about there. Also, I've rebalanced cult influence. I'll even just show you right now here. So cult influence now gives minus 2.50 approval from all of the factions, and then plus 5 for the theocrats instead of a reduction. So this is now, this is what I meant for it to be before, but I had sort of coded it wrong. This basically results in fact, I'll just let a month go by to show you what it results in. This results in your government having some pretty serious problems because your factions lose lots of approval. Now, faction approval has a couple of serious implications for your gameplay, and I'll talk in a moment about the way faction approval and faction influence work together to affect this number up here, the Ecclesia Mandate, which is honestly the most important part of all of this, is the Ecclesia Mandate system, but I'll get to that in a moment. Because first I want to talk for a second about loyalty. Now, I've rebalanced loyalty pretty significantly. The base loyalty in Hegemony is now basically 45, and it was previously 55. 33 is still the cutoff for someone to be disloyal, but there's now a number of things contributing to disloyalty that you need to keep in mind. First of all, power base affects loyalty. It affects it less than in the base game, as in the base game, power base had a very oversized impact on loyalty, but it does still affect it. Also, low faction approval affects it, and the more the faction becomes unhappy, the worse the approval effect will affect loyalty. So that is going to further reduce it. And critically, not same faction as ruler. So basically, in the context of the start of the game, the stratocratic faction is in charge. So all of these characters are all characters that are not stratocratic characters. You can see not same faction as ruler. This is going to be a consistent part of your polyarchy campaigns, with all of the out-of-power factions being upset and all of their characters having lower loyalty. Now, the -5 from that is pretty significant, and this is a big reason why so many characters are in this kind of disloyal character range where they're blue, which means that they're a few points away from getting to that 33 threshold. Now, this was just a lot of information to share with you all, and I know that it may be a little hard to make sense of how this all works together, and I promise I'll give you an overview of the relationship of these systems in just a moment. But I first want to finish by talking about the way Ecclesia Mandate is calculated. So, Ecclesia Mandate basically represents in fact, I'll just read this to you here. Ecclesia Mandate is calculated by adding all 4 factional mandates together. The resulting value represents the percent of your Ecclesia, which will support your actions this month. If your Ecclesia Mandate is below 50%, you cannot take any actions that require Ecclesia support. Now, because I've screwed up on purpose to lower my Ecclesia Mandate under 50, let me show you what I'm now dealing with here, as all actions that require Ecclesia approval, anything that requires the approval of the Ecclesia, you cannot do without 50 or more Ecclesia Mandate. So there's no longer any sort of forcing through the Senate with tyranny. Those days are over. Now you need the Ecclesia to agree with you to do anything that requires their vote. This is a paralyzing, crippling problem for anyone. And so this is the big reason why playing politics in Hegemony is going to be important, is to keep the Ecclesia Mandate going. This is both from a gameplay point of view, my big goal of making playing politics a bigger part of the mod, because this is a very important and serious mechanic to keep under control, but also from a thematic point of view, the democracies of classical Hellas were not the institution-based, representative democracies of the modern day world. These were direct democracies where the entire system was infamously very prone to being completely paralyzed by factionalism, a serious concern that Thucydides spends a lot of time talking about when explaining the problems of the democracies of his time period that he's writing in. And this kind of direct democracy basically never happened again on a large scale. Essentially, since the Athenian democracy, all attempts at republics and democracies really tried to rein in the capacity of the system to get this paralyzed by having tons of checks and balances to prevent this sort of thing. Not that it has worked that well, as we've seen in modern day politics, but the point is that having a system where if you can't keep a basic majority of your Ecclesia happy with you, it destroys your ability to do any sort of diplomacy and politics, is not only an interesting gameplay mechanic to force you to pay attention to and take a lot of care in managing your internal politics, but it also feels very authentic to the period and the setting of my mod. This is the kind of thing that a classical Hellenic democracy would need to be concerned about. And the idea of having the loss of a simple majority being this catastrophic honestly isn't a stretch. This is genuinely, I think, a good representation of how these classical democracies kind of worked and the danger you face if you don't manage this correctly. Now, fortunately, I had to basically give myself an extreme malice to get to this, and I only just barely got into it. This is meant to be something you should be able to keep under control with a bit of effort. But you need to be paying attention to your politics as a polyarchy. This is non-negotiable. This is not a part of the game like in vanilla IR. You can just kind of ignore and just attend to on occasion. This is an important thing you need to constantly be concerned with. Now, having explained how Ecclesia Mandate works, let me talk about how it's calculated. So, factional mandate is a phrase that I've not used yet other than when reading this tooltip, and that's because it's basically a term that I've created to describe something that the game doesn't actually have its own term for. As I note here in the tooltip, every faction in your Ecclesia provides a factional mandate. These are calculated by dividing their factional influence by 100, and then multiplying it by that faction's approval. And then it shows the factional mandates from the different factions. So, this is basically, in my previous Imperator Rome campaigns where I've played as a republic, I've talked about this idea of different factions having different weights for the support in the Senate. This is basically what this mechanic is, and I've given it a name, factional mandate, and I've tried my best with the tooltip to demystify and pull back the curtain on one of the most complicated parts of playing as a republic in Imperator Rome. The way Senate support is calculated, although I figured it out and I've displayed it here in the tooltip, is not very intuitive at all. So basically, the key thing to know for playing as a democracy or an oligarchy is that the value of either number, influence or approval, is the same. it doesn't matter which of them is higher. They're both weighted the same as each other. Because of the way that the mandate is calculated, it takes the influence, divides it by 100, and then multiplies it by the approval. So I've done this calculation a bunch of times with different sets of numbers. And basically, what this means is that whether you're focusing on increasing approval or increasing influence, both approaches are equally viable from a ratio point of view. So basically, whether you have a high approval, low influence faction or a high influence, low approval faction, the resulting Ecclesia mandate will be pretty consistent, or the factional mandate will be pretty consistent, which means there's a number of approaches you can take with the character system to try and guide the factions into the positions you want them in, as all of my changes are meant to enable a deeper level of min-maxing and kind of plotting and scheming style of playstyle, with my Crusader Kings background clearly showing there, with trying to control the factions of your government being a core part of politics gameplay. Now, having said all that, let me back up for a second and talk about the character modifiers again, to explain how all these systems work together. So, basically, think of it like a giant string of mechanics that all link together to form a long formula that goes from the earliest parts of the formula to the last part being the all-important Ecclesia mandate. So you start with the attributes. Attributes directly affect conviction, which affects which party the character's personal influence is being added to for the sake of factional influence. The attributes also affect popularity, which then increases ambition. Ambition increases personal influence even further, plus other modifiers as well. So a character who you want to have a greater increase on the faction that they're in, you want to have more popularity and more ambition. But most of the time you're going to want everyone to have as little popularity and ambition as possible, as it makes them harder to control and they have a larger impact that you may not necessarily want, as you have plenty of characters to work with to additively get more impact. Keeping in mind, of course, that their impact is going to be 0 if they don't have any power base. So you want to make sure that the characters you're focusing on are those who have power base from one form or another. Now, their personal influence is then being added to the faction that they have the highest conviction for. So again, by changing a character's attributes or directly adding or removing conviction itself, you can shift where they're sending their personal influence to. And I'll talk again in the next dev diary about the different ways you're going to be able to manipulate this. So anyways, once you've figured out, I want this character to specifically give their personal influence to the factional influence of a specific faction. You then are thinking about, how is the factional influence of this faction comparing with the other factions? Is it worthwhile, for example, to specifically try to support the Democratic faction over the plutocratic faction? I've not yet actually created the various faction-specific events and modifiers that reflect the theming of what they are, as all of these base mechanics are just with these factions kind of interchangeably. But of course, there are many reasons why you may want to have the Stratocrats or the Theocrats or whoever actually be in charge for the sake of their faction and their theming and what they can bring mechanically. So you can control factional influence directly by engaging in the politicking of moving characters into and out of different factions. You can also directly affect approval, both negatively by having high cult influence, but also positively by doing missions, by completing different objectives that the factions give you, and just by siding with the faction or not siding against them during events. The way that I plan for this to work is that, like I sort of said before, faction influence is going to generally, or I should say faction approval, is going to generally be quite slippery. It's going to be something that you have to kind of tinker with reactively on the fly, and you can't really lock them down as fully on board with you for that long. And as opposed to that, faction influence is more under your control, but requires longer, slower, kind of more of a gardening approach as opposed to a sort of slash and burn, high risk, high reward approach with the approval. And because these two systems are equally weighted in the calculation for mandate, you can decide, for example, do I care about having characters all having high popularity so that I can guide high popularity characters into having positions of power in factions that I want to keep influence high and control politics like that? Or do I want to keep everyone's popularity low and specifically focus on micromanaging the factions through the approval system? Either way is both viable. And so I want to give you as many possible ways as possible. I know I said possible twice there, but I mean it. I want you to have as much freedom as possible to manage this political system in the way that you want to. And that way might be minimally. And that's okay. I don't want this to destroy your game. But you need to pay attention to these factions when you're playing as a democracy or an oligarchy, or you risk running out of your 50 and above Ecclesia mandate safe zone. Because, of course, at the end of the day, Ecclesia mandate cannot be overlooked. This is a central mechanic to playing as a polyarchy, a democracy or an oligarchy, and essentially the bare minimum everyone needs to do in a campaign playing as one of these kinds of countries is to keep an eye on how the factional mandate is shaping up. If you just want to kind of do decisions that make all the factions kind of happy, you don't really favor one or the other, you let the elections kind of go untampered with, and so you have a natural cycle of factions coming in and out of power, and you just focus on keeping this magic number above 50, that's completely fine. But if you want to go deeper, if you want to be a scheming, kind of a master plan having politics manipulator, you can, and I really want this system to allow that and reward that with a deep level of control, but it requires a lot of planning and very careful forethought about what you're doing and how you're doing it. So that's my overall overview of the character overhaul coming in 0.7. Now, having said all that, let me quickly take a detour to talk about the modifier outcomes of the stats of the ruler, because this is something you want to think about as well. Obviously, the ruler's martial affects their quality as a general for the capital levy, and their finesse affect their quality as a governor for the capital region. But in terms of what the other modifiers do, martial is going to be adding plus point, I think it's a point, it's 0.05 morale of armies and navies per point of martial, which is actually pretty high. This is about the quality of 3 military morale techs together for just having 6 martial. The finesse adds 0.50% population happiness per point of finesse for the entire nation. Charisma reduces monthly ambition for everybody by 0.20. This is meant to be something that could be good or bad, whether or not you plan to have a high ambition strategy. I'll talk more about that in a moment, really in more than a couple moments, because an entire part of the tech tree is built around a kind of interesting sort of flipped way of approaching popularity and ambition. But the idea here being that a super charismatic leader would reduce the feeling of ambitious people, that they can kind of take their chances with doing something funny in politics, so it just sort of represents that through this mechanic. Most of the time, most playthroughs will want to maintain everyone at a lower ambition level in order to keep politics under control. And I should also note, by the way, that characters with higher popularity and ambition will also make their presence known by having access to special triggered events, where they basically cause problems for you that will make you regret letting them have high popularity and high ambition. Lastly, zeal increases diplomatic reputation, which makes sense. This is the theming of the religion tech tree, and it's by 2 dip rep per point of zeal. Right, so with all that being said, let's talk about the cultural developments tech tree. Here it is. Let's get into it. So first of all, in terms of the structure of the tech tree, there's basically 3 different thirds going on. We've got this left third over here, this line here. We have this right third over here, and then we have this middle third. And the reason I sort of break it up like this is that the left and right thirds work together to represent the kinds of modifiers most people want for their strategies that focus on getting more loyalty, reducing the cost of character wages, and eventually reducing popularity for everybody and reducing ambition for everybody. Keeping in mind, of course, that it also grants additional ruler popularity to offset that a little bit, because you actually do want to have a popular ruler and an ambitious ruler. In fact, let me just show you really quick here with a bit of a, where am I going here? Actually, I'm in the right spot here. All right, so let me just go ahead and do a little bit of this. Popularity. Give him 100 popularity, and I'm going to give him 100 ambition as well. Oops, I spell that right. If you can't tell, ambition is my rework of corruption. Okay, so with 100 popularity, your ruler reduces your entire nation's national unrest by 5, and everyone's monthly ambition by 0.12. So again, helping to keep the entire nation under control. A more popular ruler reduces ambition even further for everybody. This does affect himself as well. and introducing national unrest. This is quite a handy modifier, as 0.5 is going to mostly counteract the amount of unrest most locations will have most of the time. And unrest, if you don't remember, I mean, you can't see it now because it's all gone, but actually there's a bit left here because it's not applied yet. Basically, it causes a reduction in territory, provincial loyalty, and population output. Quite a bit of population output loss, actually. So this will help quite a bit with your nation. And then with ambition, ambition provides the same modifiers to the ruler, but it also provides an authority bonus. So a super ambitious ruler increases the authority rate. Now, authority gain is a pretty uncommon modifier in the mod. It's meant to be kind of hard to get more authority than what you're able to get through the religious development's tech tree. So this is actually quite a powerful bonus, as this is doubling your authority gain. I currently do have 0, but you'll, in theory, typically have more than 0 per month being added. So there is a kind of playstyle you can go for where you intentionally allow ambitious, popular characters to be the icon and benefit from those qualities, but most of the time, these modifiers are meant to be, generally speaking, fairly negative and something you want to keep under control for your large cast of characters. Anyways, getting back over to the tech tree, the left and right trees are focused on supporting the kind of expected playstyle most people would want to do, where you keep everyone's ambition and popularity under control, and there's tons of other useful bonuses like loyalty bonuses, popularity of ruler bonuses, which is handy when the ruler obviously increases to holding income, that sort of thing. And then we've got this middle tree, which is actually kind of this reversal where it focuses on increasing ambition, increasing popularity, making popularity decay more slowly, and ultimately allows for, at the end, a very interesting final capstone tech. And I'll talk about this more in a bit, but basically, there are 2 pairs of the one or the other capstone techs that require you not get the other one. But all of these techs require you to also not get the middle one. So you basically are picking between one of these 2 and one of these 2, or one of these 2, or what I should say is you're picking between basically the chance to get both of the 2 side techs and not the middle tech, or just the middle tech is the way to phrase it, really. So the middle tech here is not available if you get any of the other capstones, is the way to phrase that. I'll talk about this more later when we get into the specifics of what's going on down there. But first, let's go over all the techs. Starting over here with Eusebia. Eusebia, good reverence, is the virtuous lifestyle of loyalty to one's family, one's community, and ultimately one's polis. With many politicians conspiring against our rule, we must remind all that Eusebia is expected from all in our city-state. Loyalty of characters +10. This is a very attractive early game tech to grab to get your initial situation with disloyalty, with everyone having loyalty problems from power base, from being in the wrong faction, perhaps even from... You can see, by the way, I can look at this guy and tell you right now this guy is a theocrat because he has high faction approval. Look at that. Look at me. Game design mastery right here, because I know that because his faction has high approval because of the cult influence. So I look at my system resulting in reliable outcomes. I love to see that. Anyways, so +10 loyalty of characters will basically get your initial issues with the risk of characters' loyalty under control initially, but keep in mind with everyone's popularity raising and their ambition raising as a result and everything happening from that, it's not going to be long before loyalty problems start to crop up again. Now, loyalty in this mod is mostly affected for polyarchies by faction approval, and so that's something to keep in mind as well, is that in order to control character loyalty, you have to make sure faction approval is under control. Moving on, we've got Fadmakoi. The Fadmakoi are animal, sometimes human, sacrifices made to ward off ill omen on the entire community. Our people live in fear, not that the gods misjudge their character, but that the gods judge it truly. And so Fadmakoi are called for and calm is restored, +2 loyalty of characters. Next up is Thargelia, a festival to honor the twin gods Apollon and Artemis. The Thargelia features the sacrifice of a Fadmakos by throwing a criminal off a cliff. This ritualistic cleansing of the polis reassures all that their government has things under control, whatever the truth may be. Lastly, Aesopos. The legendary storyteller Aesopos is known to have been sacrificed as a Pharmakos in Delphi. The story is a reminder that no matter who one is or what one does, all it takes to find yourself thrown off a cliff is for those in power to want you thrown off a cliff. +5 loyalty of characters. Over here we have this other path, which is loyalty of governors, starting with Ostrakismos. For those whose Eusebia is in question, the ultimate punishment Poles have at their disposal is ostracismos, exile from the city-state and loss of all associated rights for a decade. Showing our willingness to use this process should keep the powerful in line. +2 loyalty of governors. Next up is Periszkoinizma. To ensure the process of voting for ostracismos is fairly supervised, the Periszkoinizma, an area of the Agora fenced off for this purpose, can be erected. The very sight of this distinct area should remind our disloyal governors what fate they may face. +3 loyalty. And finally, Ostraka. The process of voting for ostracismos involves the Ostraka, shards of pottery that are reused to wipe one's rear to further dishonor the exile's name. Though allowed back after 10 years, avoiding this degree of infamy is a powerful motivator for politicians in our polis. +5 loyalty of governors. Now, you may already notice a bit of a problem with the way I've laid out this part of the tech tree. Why ever go for loyalty of governors when loyalty of characters actually covers governors as well? That's because this other tree here, this weaker set of options, is required, this or the other one, to get into the middle tree. I'll talk about this more when I talk about the middle tree, but the middle tree is meant to be kind of harder to move through and require commitment to weaker sets of text from the outer trees. Although you can, of course, get everything, you're not required to get one or the other, but you're going to have limited innovation points available, or limited invention points available. Actually, no, innovation points is the right phrase. Available at any given time. So I want it to feel as though you're really committing to the big picture goal of the middle tree if you go for it, which I'll talk about more later. Next up, requiring either Isopos or Straka, is Dorodokian. Dorodokian, receiving, literally of a gift and euphemistically of a bribe, is a common practice in our polis. Though some may disapprove, drachmae grease the wheels of politics, and we would do well to make sure every coin we spend is a wise investment. This reduces the bribe cost by 50%. All of these different sort of clusters of text result in an action reduction cost for a character action. So this one reduces bribe cost, this one reduces smear reputation cost, this one reduces extol reputation cost. I'll talk about this new mechanic in a bit. Over here, this one reduces payoff veterans, this one reduces demand realignment, and this one reduces prosecute cost. Now, all of these character interactions, I'm still working on the UI for them, but they are all going to be available, and they do different things. So I'll go through them as I talk about the different things that reduce their cost, but basically, bribe is going to require 2 authority until you get the actual reduction, then it's going to require 1 authority. I'm going to fix the UI. It doesn't actually require you to gain corruption, which this mod is now ambition, or to pay money. It's just going to be an authority cost. Right, moving along, we've got strategoi. Our polis puts the fate of our citizen soldiers in the hands of strategoi, elected generals who the people entrust to lead the levied men collectively. We must be vigilant in considering who would get ideas about turning the hoplite around and triggering a civil war. Loyalty of generals +2. Euthina. While the euthina, the straightening out process of review for public officials, is not specific to the strategoi, any inclination towards rebellion will come to light when their actions are closely scrutinized. They best remember that before it's too late. More loyalty of generals +3 in particular. Logos. The euthina process always begins with the logos, the statement of account, where the public official makes their case for having performed their duties properly. We should remind our strategoi that it is our people who judge their self-assessment. Loyalty of governors, or loyalty of generals +5. On this side we have the admiral line, starting with Simorii. The Simorii are organized councils of polities responsible for funding the navy, and they hold the actions of our admirals under close scrutiny. No sane man would command the fleet with ill intent, knowing that he will have to answer for his actions to the Simorii. Next up is Sin Tiles, with loyalty of admirals +3. The Simorii is funded by the Sin Tiles, a group of wealthier polities who will be sure to revenge themselves upon any admiral who is suspected of misbehavior while under their watch. Where loyalty fails, the wrath of the wealthy is sure to keep our admirals in line. This then leads to Strategos Epitas Simories. The final evolution to the Simorii system is to assign a Strategos to oversee it. So the ambitious men hoping to use naval power to undermine us must first survive scrutiny of another ambitious man. Power, as always, is an effective answer to power. Either one of these allows for the next one, which is Decastis, which is that smear reputation cost reduction. Smear reputation, normally, let me just find a character to use as an example, is going to require 2 authority as well. And it also gains you approval from the other 3 factions and reduces approval of the faction whose member you're smearing. and it reduces their popularity by 25, which is very important. This is the main way that you actually manage the popularity levels of characters, is you smear them. Now, in the base game, this was also true. They lost popularity when you smeared them, but the main sort of gameplay effect of smearing that mattered in vanilla was just the approval change, but I want to actually make the popularity loss from smearing a larger deal, so actually using smearing often to control the popularity gain of different characters, and which say reduce it, is an important part of a high-level polyarchy gameplay in my mod. So that 50% cost reduction will be quite nice for that. Next up, we've got Archontes. The Archon is elected to rule the polis, and there's significant power in this office, even if polis have largely tried to prevent their Archontes from consolidating enough power to establish themselves as Tyranoi, which is tyrants. The Archon's name rings out across the polis, plus 0.25 monthly ruler popularity. Now, something interesting about the ruler popularity modifiers is that there's a bit of a double-edged sword situation going on here, for democracies in particular. Now, keep in mind that this tree is designed with the gameplay of all playable countries, including tribes and monarchies, in mind. None of these modifiers are directly polyarchy specific. But for democracies, with their constantly cycling rulers, having your ruler gain lots of popularity while they're in office and then keep it when they leave could present a bit of a problem, as the post-Archonship ruler could still cause issues for the balance of your faction. So it may make sense to actually reconsider if going down this line of techs makes sense playing as a democracy, unless you have a plan to deal with characters as they leave the Archonship. Next up, we have Thesmotete. The Archon is supported by a number of subordinate officers, the Thesmotete. The Thesmotete. With competent officials helping them complete their goals, they have more time to ensure their status is properly leveraged for the sake of establishing their personal reputation, another plus 0.25 monthly ruler popularity. Then we have Anarchia. No matter what the Archon does, their term is considered preferable by any sane politis to Anarchia, a polis without a ruling Archon. This is also where the word anarchy comes from. With this in mind, crafty Archontes, which is the plural of Archon, can focus on strengthening their popularity no matter the long-term consequences. Over here we have the Pretenes line. This reduces monthly ambition. The public officials tasked with running the Boule, the Pretenes, have extraordinarily limited power, being forced to alternate rule every few weeks. This keeps the ambitions of the politically inclined in check and keeps real power away from hands we don't want it in. Next up is Epistates. The Epistates is the foreman of the Pretenes, but with only a single day in office. The position is even more impermanent. By guiding the ambitions into such roles, we put a serious check on their ability to advance themselves beyond our control. Another minus 0.5 monthly ambition. Next up is Prytanian. The Prytanian is the seat of the Pretenes, and by limiting all of their political activity to this public setting, we limit their ability to plot and scheme out of our earshot. Plotting and scheming, of course, being something we will only tolerate when we do it to them. Another minus 0.10 monthly ambition. This then allow you to get logographos. By utilizing those skilled in logographos speechwriting, we can promote those politicians who prove themselves useful to our goals. If they catch on, all the better for it. It reminds them what we can do to their reputations and careers if they stop being useful to us. This reduces the new extol reputation mechanic by 50%. And just to show what that does, extol reputation, you pay 500 gold from the treasury of the nation, not from the character, wealth, and this would be reduced to 250 once you get that tech. And the current Archon loses 5 popularity, but the character that you're targeting gains 10 popularity and gains 10 loyalty for 5 years. Now, this may seem like kind of a bad trade-off, but if your goal is to secure loyalty on a character, this is one of the ways you can do so. Now, obviously, bribery also secures loyalty. It secures, it doesn't actually say that there correctly, but I haven't fixed the tooltip, but bribery also secures loyalty. But extolling is meant to be a sort of larger scale way to gain loyalty for a long time, and to also give them popularity. There's not a lot of ways to give someone popularity, so if you really want to big up a certain character with popularity, this is one of the ways. Of course, all the different amounts are subject to be rebalanced as I continue working on the mod. What I want to have here for the showcase is just the core systems and be able to explain how they all work. This then allows for one of the two options down here, the first being Hegemonia. Our efforts to guide and control the politicians of our polis have in the end proven successful. All recognize the common interest in the polis itself, not any one man, rising to power. Hegemony is an aim greater than any career, a project we will achieve together. This grants an additional plus 10 loyalty of characters, a great tech to go for if you're just having trouble keeping your politicians under control and want to make sure you have a bit of extra loyalty just to clean things up for the late game. Alternatively, if things are really going badly and you're worried about civil war, we've got Stratokratia. Despite our efforts, real power in our polis remains in ambitious hands, politicians who may dream of carving their way to sole rule. To preserve the polis, we must compromise with them. In the end, they will all kill each other, and it is we who will be left standing. This gives you a very healthy plus 25 loyalty for generals, admirals, and governors. And I think this also double dips when a governor is acting as a general, so just be aware of that. But basically, if you do have the Mora system with the sort of legion-style armies with their sort of legates, this will help with that too. So if you are just concerned about preventing people with lots of power base from having loyalty problems, this is the tech to go for, though Hegemonia is hard to argue against. So basically you pick this based on what level of loyalty problems you're having in your polis. Moving over to the other side of the tech tree, we start with Litogoria. Running a polis is no easy feat, nor is it cheap. The Litogoria is a voluntary contribution expected by our wealthier politis. By assuming control over this process and applying it selectively, we can also mitigate the expense accrued by our public officials. This is the first of a number of wage reduction techs to help reduce the often quite significant cost of paying character wages. For example, here we've got character wages that are comparable to our fort maintenance, which is not something you'd normally see in vanilla. I want character wages to feel like a genuinely impactful mechanic, so these techs are a bit more competitive because of it. Next up, we've got Koregoi. Any performance involving a koros is an expensive affair, and absent a private patron, it falls to us to foot the bill, which means it actually falls to everybody else. The Koregoi will ensure our politis have their entertainment, even if their pockets are lighter for it, with more monthly wage reduction for characters of minus 4%. Next up is Archithoria. The Archithoria is a liturgia meant to fund our delegation to the Panhellenic Games, assuming they're still scheduled in these times, that is. Nonetheless, our treasury would benefit from us issuing this tax regardless of its circumstantial propriety. Monthly wages for characters minus 6%. Then we've got Gymnasiarchia. The Gymnasiarchia is a liturgia used to fund the gymnasians of our polis, which not only keep our people fit and ready for war, it provides us a reliable income stream, which, if needed, could be diverted for just about anything we might need it for. Monthly wages reduction of minus 10%. Over here we have the governor wage, which, sort of like on the other side, is covered to some extent by character wages, but because it's a bit more specific, it also allows for you to get this middle tech down here. This requires this tech over here and either Ostraka or Hippotropia. Doesn't need both, one or the other. That's what the gold sort of arrow thing there means. Anyways, starting up here, Litogoros. Overseeing the Litogoria is the Litorgos, selected from among volunteering politis by a public official, or if we hope to counteract any brewing corruption among our governors, selected by our agents. A loyal Litogoros, we hope, will keep wages under control. Minus 4% governor wage. Next up is Hestiasis. Minus 6% governor wage. The Hestiasis is a tax levied in part to fund the Litogoros, a tax which, were we to issue it creatively, could be borne by the governors. Though they may complain to share most of their civic spoils, they would do well to keep their heads down and keep their jobs. Lastly is Hippotrophia. The Hippotrophia is a rare liturgia we can levy on the high cost of maintaining cavalry, what little we have at least. Given that the governors lead such forces, it should fall to them to provide the necessary funds, otherwise everyone will just have to walk into battle, minus 10% more governor wage. One of these two is required to get to Isfora. Our experience in using the Litogoria system creatively has given us the resources to begin reinvesting these funds into an important source, veteran citizen soldiers who have grown discontent with our leadership. We will ensure they are brought back into loyalty. So, very similar to the vanilla game, you can pay off veterans to reduce the power base of people who have veterans that are loyal to them. Let me just find a character to show what this looks like. Let's see. Yeah, I've renamed it to Coerce Veterans. I think I probably need to fix the localization. But yeah, you basically will pay 200 treasury gold will be reduced to 100 with the modifier to reduce up to 4 cohorts from the character. If they have any, that is. Alright, let me start over here with Steno Korea. In Hellas, the stenochoria, the stinginess of our soil, is often cursed by the Aristoi seeking to profit from the land their families owned. While we can't do much about the climate, we can try to help them make a profit. Making a showing of it will earn their gratitude. This will increase holdings income by 20%. Holdings remain a mechanic in the mod, although it's not a super large mechanic in the base game. In this case, granting holdings is one reliable way to get yourself some loyalty from problem characters. Let's see, where's my holding button? Let's see. Holdings. Where's my holding button? Oh, it has to be a... No. Where is my holdings button? Hold on. Hold on. I'm not finding my holdings button. Where is it? Do I have any holdings available? Is that the problem? Hold on. Quick detour to try to figure this one out. Definitely have holdings available. This worked before. Okay, I'm not sure where the holdings button went. I will find it later. But once I do find it, it will benefit from the holdings income. Look at that. Clean transition back into the spiel. Anyways, moving on, we've got Klerukos for more holdings income, plus 30%. A Klerukos, a lot holder, is any politis who owns private land in the polis. Expanding this group to include more than the traditional Aristoi landowners is sure to irritate them, but also sure to fatten our treasury with additional income from these new estates, another 30% holdings income. Lastly, Kleroi. Polites dispatched to work on private estates, the Kleroi can reduce the cost to run these projects dramatically. As an additional benefit for us, it also empties our own polis at a time where overcrowding within the walls is a real risk to our stability, another 50% holdings income. On this side, we've got the statesmanship decay bonus line. Now, this is pretty interesting because it basically reduces the rate that statesmanship is lost for all characters across the board, which if you're cycling around different characters to be officers, which you may want to do to build power base with characters over time, kind of, set by set, this will keep everyone's statesmanship from decaying quite as quickly. Academia. The Academia is a sacred grove in Athenai, often used for both religious and educational purposes. Investing in our own infrastructure to promote learning is worth the cost, especially in the long run when we must use the next generation. 10% reduced statesmanship decay. Next up is Scholarche. Heading the educational efforts at the Academia is the Scholarche, a professional teacher and administrator. In other words, if we hope to leverage the educational power our own institutions will impart, we must ensure our Scholarches are loyal agents to our ends, another 50% reduced decay rate. Finally, Didascolae. A single Scholarche cannot efficiently educate everybody. Employment of Didascoloi, teachers, is required to expand the scope of our budding educational efforts. And just like their Scholarche, we intend to keep all of these professionals firmly in our pocket, another 25% reduced, for a total, by the way, of 50% reduction. One of these two then allows for Xenolazia, which is the demand realignment cost button. I can't show this super easily because all of the starting characters in Athenai are going to be Delian. Let me just find a character from Argos who I can interact with. Let's see. Actually, let me just do it like this because I can't find a character super easily. Not my own nation. Let me just find someone. Who's this? Here's someone in Delphi. Let me invite this guy. Nation. That's all my authority gone. That's fine. He's arrived. Where is he? Here he is. So this guy is now in my nation. He is unaligned because he came from an unaligned polis. I can now, with this character, if I had the resources for it, where is it? Yeah, here it is. I've not changed the localization to force realignment, but this, once I had the authority, I could do this. This will convert his religion to Delian. You sort of get what I'm doing here. So, yeah. Anyways, and this will reduce the cost to only one authority. Originating with the Lacedaemonians, Xenolazia is a harsh form of exile, harsh enough that the threat of using it against those who prove too thoroughly stubborn to control otherwise may be called for. Though going too far could cause problems for us down the road. This then leads to the popularity-reducing texts, graphi. Public prosecutions, graphi, are a source of ruinous embarrassment for any who find themselves the accused. By studying the actions of our political enemies closely, we can ensure any rise to power is swiftly followed by a graphi on one charge or another. Minus 0.05 popularity for everybody. Decay. Private prosecutions or decay are typically put forward for money, but were we to use our connections to ensure decay are initiated at just the right time, we could further hamper and discredit our enemies wherever they outmaneuver our other efforts. Another minus 0.05 popularity. By the way, I'm going to balance the popularity gain from attributes and increase the popularity loss from these texts, as I think I didn't quite balance this the right way, as this should be enough, these different texts together, to offset popularity gain naturally from attributes for most characters. So let me rebalance that and show that off in the next dev diary. Then moving on to Kritis. Though uncommon, Kritis judges can make all the difference in both a public or private trial. Should a Kritis be called for to guide the proceeding, we must ensure whoever is agreed upon is firmly in our pocket. After all, we wouldn't want justice to be done. Some very cynical takes going on here from the flavor text, but it adds to the sort of pragmatic realism tone of the mod. Over here, we've got the monthly popularity decay text, which increase the rate of decay. Skepsis. Exemption from serving as a liturgos is rarely granted, but also rarely popular. Many see serving one's term as a civic duty. Were we to loudly announce the exemption for those we consider possible threats to our rule, their reputation would suffer for it. This then leads to Ateleia. The Ateleia is an even broader exemption for liturgos duty, one which we could impose freely on any we wish to cast in a negative light. To avoid reputational harm, those who catch on to our intentions would do well to get back in line with our intents. This then leads to Misthophoreo. The Misthophoreo is a radical measure, one that pays all polites who leave their professions to perform public service full-time. This effort may strain at the treasury, but it also obliterates the power private patrons have accrued over those who they once employed, plus 0.15% monthly popularity decay. One of these two then leads to Dikigoros. Even less common in Hellas than judges, Dikigoroi, lawyers, are a novel notion. Studying the law is a craft, a useless pursuit when the letter of the law only holds whatever power we allow it to, which is rarely any. Nonetheless, these professionals may be of use to us. Yeah, alright, so I'm just going to leave any commentary about that one off the table for now. This reduces prosecute cost, which is another character interaction. Just find a character to prosecute in my own nation, please. There we go. This is the bring to trial action, which I'm going to rename to reflect its new name there. Where is it? Literally, where is it? Hold on. Where are all my character interactions at? I'm still working on the character interaction, so it's a little bit messy. It's not imprison. Do I need to rival it first? I'm not entirely sure. I'll fix it. I've been tinkering with the character interactions quite a bit, so I may have accidentally caused some of them to cease to exist in the UI. I will fix it and show my fixes in the next dev diary, never fear. But you get the idea of how this tech mechanically is meant to work. Then this allows for the selection of one of these two, assuming you didn't get this middle one. The first is Skepsis. Skepsis is a budding school of thought that encourages disagreement and challenges assumptions about authority. A potentially disruptive force in our polis, yes, but one sure to improve everyone's aptitude, and really isn't improving our people what we're here for. Very tongue-in-cheek take from the cynical and sort of sinister development flavor text writer. So this is going to be pretty interesting. Skepsis adds 1% monthly statesmanship to everybody. This is a nationwide character modifier, which means you can basically prepare everyone for possible sort of high-quality positions in office without actually having them in position yet, which is great for the larger cast of characters you'll have access to in your campaign. So pretty interesting and powerful modifier that gives everybody statesmanship gain, even when they're not in office, because that's what this is doing. The alternative is Austerotes, which reduces monthly wages for characters by a huge 30%. This, on top of the earlier numbers, is going to give you a total of 50% reduction if you go for this. Austerotes is a last resort for our long struggle to get the city-state's finances under control. To survive the coming ages, we must take this final step, a step we hope not to regret. After all, when has austerity ever caused problems in Hellas? Alright, so topical references aside, this is definitely the one to go for if all you care about is preventing your character wages from spiraling out of control. Remembering, by the way, that characters who increase their ambition increase their character wages by a lot, by 500% for 100 ambition. So as characters gain ambition over time, their wages will increase, and you're going to have increasingly serious problems paying for all of your officers. Yeah, so definitely something that's worth considering. Now we get to the fun part. This is the middle third of the tech tree, and it is designed to basically be something you opt into because of the weird way that it kind of conflicts with the rest of the tech tree. So first of all, mechanically speaking, what this is doing is it's a series of techs that increase monthly ambition and then increase everyone's popularity and reduces their popularity decay, directly contradicting these other techs that do the opposite. And then at the bottom, it adds more monthly family prestige. And it ends with one of the most interesting possible capstone techs, one that requires you to not get any of the other capstones in order to unlock it, Aletheia, which I'm just going to reveal right now because I'm sure you're all wondering what this is. This gives you completely free assassinations, imprisonments, and executions. These actions normally cost lots of authority. You can do them for free if you go this route. So this middle route basically represents kind of leaning into the chaotic nature of politics to basically give everybody tons of ambition, tons of popularity, and ultimately give yourself the power to just completely freely control politics in the darkest of ways by killing and imprisoning everybody that you want to with very little cost, or really no cost. There are still other consequences, of course, but this basically unlocks a kind of dark, sort of tyrannical playstyle that you wouldn't normally be able to feasibly do, given the limited sources of authority to work with. And, of course, to get to the point of becoming a great tyrant, this middle path is themed around the theater. We've got ourselves a villain arc for any of you theater kids out there, as this middle path is based on the development of classical Hellenic theater, ending with everyone being easy to murder. So make of that what you will. Starting with Dithyrambos. This is plus 0.05 monthly ambition. The Dithyrambos is a ritual honoring Dionysus, traditionally involving dozens of men dancing wildly and performing as a competition between groups. To participate in the Dithyrambos and see victory is sure to bolster the heart of any true Hellene. This then leads to, oh boy, Autos Schediastikis. On occasion, the music and singing, that's a typo, it should be singing, not signing. The signing, they're in some very intense sign language. The music and signing at Dithyrambos has been known to veer away from the topic of Dionysus to other matters, with participants flexing their creativity through improvisation. Such displays, though of dubious piety, are a source of great inspiration. Another plus 0.05 monthly ambition for everybody. Koros. Frequent improvisational changes to the Dithyrambos have produced a new kind of performance, one that features a koros, a collective of storytellers guiding the bewildered audience through the narrative. Perhaps a new art form altogether is taking shape, with another plus 0.05 monthly ambition. This then leads to Korifaios, the final plus 0.05 monthly ambition. Beyond the koros, some performances are now featuring a Korifaios, a koros leader, to present the narrative more directly. While some complain the Dithyrambos has strayed too far from its traditional design, some others suspect Dionysus would approve. This then, alongside either Ostraka or Hypotrophia, then leads to Trigodia, a very pivotal moment where theater is invented. From the Dithyrambos, a new kind of performance has emerged, the Trigoda, relaying stories of ancient Hellas told through actors and a chorus of singers. While we would garner approval by supporting these shows, any ambitious patron would as well. This will give everybody in the nation monthly popularity and monthly popularity decay reduction. This then opens up two routes, one that grants more popularity, one that further improves decay reduction. Over here we have Aeschylus, widely regarded as the first great writer of the Trigodia genre. Aeschylus revolutionized the medium by introducing conflict between his two characters as a form of storytelling. We should make all efforts to patronize performances of his popular works, plus 0.05 monthly popularity for everybody. Then this leads to Sophocles. Building upon the artistic foundations laid by Aeschylus, Sophocles introduced the convention of a third character, structuring the story into scenes in the diminished role of the chorus. His works are even more popular, and we should ensure they are performed, and they're plus 0.05 monthly popularity. This leads to Euripides. Pushing the Trigodia to new limits, the works of Euripides reframe the genre's traditional heroic characters as complex, layered humans. This realism is disarming, but for But our people love seeing their larger-than-life forefathers depicted as such and clamor for more. Another plus 0.05 monthly popularity. Over here we have Satiroi. Alongside the increasingly secular Tragodia, the overtly ritualistic Satiroi, satyr plays, are being performed with traditional elements of Dionysus worship, including festive and sexual overtones. Tolerating these works will go over well with the people. Monthly popularity decay reduction of 5%. This leads to Trilogia. The theatrical satyr plays have found a place as the closer to trios of Tragodia performances, perhaps to lighten the mood. These conventions, though ever increasingly distant from the religious roots of the medium, continue to prove popular. Another decay bonus. This then leads to Aristophanes. Building upon the absurdity of satyr plays, the writer Aristophanes has inverted the morals of the traditional Tragodia, and some would say invented a new genre altogether. His works are sharp, political, and above all popular. We would do well to patronize them. Another 5% decay bonus. This, alongside Euripides, allows for the invention of Komodia. The realism of Euripides and the mirth of Aristophanes has inspired a new disruptive genre, Komodia. Satirical, political, and about as far from its religious roots as one can get, this development in theater seems to give the people exactly what they want. This is the final popularity and popularity decay bonus, mirroring Tragodia above it. This then leads to the final couple of texts, which are all about different Hellenic historians, starting with Homeros. This is monthly family prestige, 1.25, and by the way, family prestige is a pretty background modifier, but what it does is it increases the power base for family heads. It's very, very minor. I may actually buff the text to make it more impactful, but family prestige is meant to be something you generally don't want there to be more of, so this is contributing to the nature of this tree as sort of doing the opposite of what you would normally want with these different modifiers. There might be some reasons why you'd want to have higher family prestige, like if you're playing as characters from one family specifically, which you can sort of try to make happen with your political intervention, but it's up to you to basically come up with a cool strategy that uses these modifiers. The popularity of theater as a medium has also repopularized the ancient stories attributed to Homeros, a blind poet from the island of Chios. His traditional, familiar tales extol old Hellenic virtues, and were we to patronize them, bolster the repute of the Aristoi. Hence why there's more family prestige from this guy having his works played by, or performed by the theater. Hesiodos. Alongside the popular stories of Homeros and ancient stories of gods and heroes attributed, that's the typo. The ancient stories of gods and heroes attributed to his contemporary Hesiodos of Kyme have become popular subjects for the theater. The Aristoi draw much of their prestige from their ancient names appearing in such tales. This then leads to Herodotus. The Halicarnassian Herodotus is widely regarded as the first historian of Hellas, having composed a detailed recounting of the Parsan invasions. The Aristoi celebrate his work as promoting the special greatness of Hellenic identity, though this is up for debate. This then leads to our favorite guy, Thucydides. The Athenian Thucydides is reported to be composing a massive and revealing account of contemporary Hellenic history and politics. Whoever he blames for the ruin that has come to Hellas, we have much to learn from his means and methods in framing history. Bit of a sly reference to my own strong implementation of Thucydides' very pragmatic, almost kind of cynical worldview in his writing into the framing of all the narrative of the mod. This then leads finally to Aletheia. 100% reduced assassination, imprisonment, and execution cost. And imprisonment here meaning not to take to trial, but just to imprison someone who's your rival directly. And of course, execute an assassination, you know what that does. The pragmatism of Thucydides' great work inspires a new way of thought. Aletheia, or unconcealedness. Put into practice, this embrace of political realism is sure to make us many enemies. But then again, who will remember them when we write our history? Some real sinister plotting going on there. But if you want to play as a completely morally bankrupt, evil authoritarian government, you are able to do so more cheaply with this tech. That wraps up the cultural developments tech tree, and that's also the conclusion of the new tech trees. I do plan one more tech tree related overhaul, which is a slight rework of the military developments tech tree, which is the kind of odd one out now. It is not really designed in the same way of the other three trees, and I have some ideas for how to clean things up a little bit, especially visually. The military developments tech tree is quite weird because it has essentially three basically unconnected tech trees all within the same category, so I have some ideas for how to approach things. I'm also working on the paradigms. I don't want to get into this too much right now as I've not fully finished the system, but the paradigms will be something I talk about more in the third part of this trilogy of dev diaries, and they will be finished alongside 0.7 as a way to put your paradigm shifts to good use. And I will mention right now that the new main way to get more maximum research capacity is through the Philosophia paradigm, which allows you to get much more max research capacity as you increase it. But I'll talk about that more in the next dev diary. That wraps it up for this developer diary. Sorry, my voice is leaving me. I've actually been trying to record this dev diary for multiple days, and I keep flubbing it. I kind of flubbed it in this one. I don't know what's going on. I'm just a little exhausted from all the work I've done on the mod, but I'm very happy with the progress I've made, and I'm so excited to finally have an attempt at recording this video that is not failed spectacularly. Let me know in the comments if you thought it failed spectacularly, and more relevantly, what you think of all the changes coming with the character overhaul and the politics overhaul for polyarchies in 0.7. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.